everyone. I am Dr. Elizabeth Sanchez Arvizu with Psychology for Geeks. And today I feel like I do not belong here because this is a panel all about horror movies, just as a genre. And I know next to nothing about any of this. So hopefully you and I will learn something today. And I have essentially gather this amazing group of people that will basically work for the next hour and a half, 2 hours to try to convince me, a non-horror fan, to become a horror fan. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
It's gonna happen. I believe in us. I believe in this group of people.
Um, so today we're talking about horror, and because it is Psychology for Geeks and I am here, we are going to also discuss mental health, but primary and how horror can be good for mental health. Even though I have been avoiding it for a very long time, I hear it's good for you to be scared every now and then. So with that being out of the way, I am actually going to pass this along and have everyone sort of introduce themselves, because they know more about the genre than I do. So I'm just gonna stop babbling, and I'm gonna go this way. So Perry, you're sort of like right next to me on the screen, so I'm gonna pick on you first and have you go first.
Okay, no, not a problem. So I'm
Best
Terry
for
Clark.
first.
I'm Terry Clark. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley region. And I also run my own podcast, which is Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, which Elizabeth has been on. And we've had some talks mostly about the superhero genre and her own work. But I'm also a member of the Symphony Entertainment, which is a indie horror role-playing game, little conglomerate. We just finished recently promoting Never Let You Go, which is which is in the Roseville Beach, or Moonlight on Roseville Beach, which is a queer-based horror system that you can find over on the channel as well on Twitch, which is all horror-centered. As for when it comes to the stuff about dealing with horror itself, I mean, I'm a child of the 80s, so I grew up with my aunt showing me Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, watching the old Stepford series and so forth, and the old Hammer films. So I grew up on a bunch of those. And come to find, I'll admit, right now, I have no interest in the gore fest horror stuff. I'm much more now interested in things that are a little more psychological, which also in this field, which is also part of the joy of what I do over at Symphony, which is playing role-playing games that can get into that horror and get into that deeper things that we can create for ourselves, as opposed to purely having to be given a visual.
David, you're up. You're sort of like up there.
Hey, I am William David Lane. I am president of Geek Wellness Education. I'm not just president, I'm also a client, which basically means we're dorks that want to help other dorks. So Geek Wellness Education goes all over the country, and we talk in panels and events about everything from princesses all the way up to horror movies and slasher films, about mental health and suicide awareness and other topics that are important to us geeks. So, hopefully we do a lot of good work there. We're also partners in the Mental Health Storytelling Coalition. So on a regular basis, we're in touch with Warner Brothers and Paramount and all those good folks about what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong in scripting and making movies and TV shows. I grew up when I was a little kid being exposed to cable horror movies. We're talking Halloween 2 is one of the earliest memories I have of being up late at night, and we would go to the old Blockbuster Video, RIP, and we would rent out movies, and it was a horror movie every week, and just get scared. And something about it connected with me, probably the fact that I had a traumatic childhood myself, and to this day I love the elevated psychological horror films. I have A24 swag all over my office, and of course, I also love a dumb slice them up as well. So yeah, that's basically me and my journey of horror.
First off, any trauma fans in here?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. I've met Lloyd, and he's amazing. But hi, I'm Hope. I am the host of the Mind Brain Movies podcast. That's on YouTube. We deep dive into the psychology of film and TV shows, and just kind of like debunk a lot of things and make sure everything's like, we just like advocate mental health to the extreme. Elizabeth is on there with me. She co-hosts with that, and her name there is Dr. Gremlin. And I am the Sherpa into the Mind Brain. And yeah, we tackle really intense topics about mental health, but we do it in like a fun way where you're not like just want to cry in the corner the whole time. So okay,
I have to clarify something. Yes, it's important, but you said we try not to do that, and how come every movie you recommend I end up crying like a baby? Okay?
not
Like,
every movie. Thank you. Not every
the
movie.
one movie that wasn't is one I suggested.
You cried at What About Bob?
She feels some kind of way about
Maybe.
this.
Anyways,
Well,
so
who didn't cry at Psycho Gorman? Come on.
All the hunky boys.
but I have been a horror fiend since I was a kid. I also have a background in crime scene cleaning and biohazard remediation. So the horror aspect, where, trust me, Art the Clown is my future husband. I already told these guys. But the thing is, that doesn't really get me. Like, the gore horror doesn't really get me anymore, just because my background. I'm definitely into, like the rest of you guys, the psychological horror as well. That's what really gets me. And I don't know. I've always a really quick anecdote is, I grew up watching like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. Those are my guys. But the one movie that got me growing up was Gremlins, because I had nightmares about everyone. I had nightmares about everyone torturing Gizmo, and I kept waking up crying like, why does everyone hate Gizmo, Mom? I just want to save him. but I'd go around and turn around and watch like Nightmare on Elm Street, and I didn't give a shit about anybody like being killed on there, but I was like crying about Gizmo. So,
And oh, the other thing I was supposed to clarify is like my nickname. It doesn't have anything to do with horror, more that I drive Hope crazy.
yes.
Because I get so sidetracked. Thank you, ADHD brain. And also like I was saying earlier, like I just have a long history of not being able to like manage my tech stuff when I have to record.
She's
And
a
it's
lot more professional with you guys than she is with me. So I try and return the
my
favor and not be professional with her on her stuff.
which she kind of has to, because then I default to just
And then
annoying
I
her.
turn mom again. So
Yeah.
anyways, last
Right.
but not least, Josh.
Howdy, y'all. I'm not from Texas. I've just been on a kick where howdy is my introduction to everyone. I don't understand it. It's maybe it's upon a burning body, maybe it's sandy cheeks, who knows? But yeah, so my name is Josh. I am the founder of a multimedia nonprofit called Victims and Villains. We create content, we do events to talk about mental health through pop culture. All of our events come with the just to have general conversations, but also provide resources and education for people in unconventional spaces like dive bars, Comic Cons, horror cons, film festivals, pretty much anywhere that will allow us to come in and have really vulnerable conversations. I'm also the host of our horror podcast called Abyss Gazing, and co-host that with my bros Mark and Billy. I am probably the outlier in a lot of these outside of Elizabeth. I grew up in a fairly conservative Christian household, and did not actually get into horror until I was well into my adulthood. And I had gravitated to it in such an unhealthy, obsessive manner that I ultimately ended up leaving it behind and walking away for it for a few years. And then ultimately, it was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that brought me back. And
Which one?
the original, the OG. I watched the OG, and then I read Gunther Hansen's book, Chainsaw Confidential, and wept a lot more than I thought I would because it's such a freaking good book. But my relationship with now it's in a very healthy place, and I will say that I my entry points into the genre outside of like the gateway horror that I know we'll talk about later was things like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Goosebumps. It was a more literary route than it was like visuals. So yeah, I feel like I feel like I'm here with Dr. Elizabeth. I'm like a little bit of the outlier here.
Yeah, but then once you decided to like start watching, like he completely diverged. Because so one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this panel was because I find all stories very interesting. I remember it just anytime my my family will have like a big family gathering, it will not fail that somebody brought up something about ghosts and spirits and stuff. And I was always like quietly like listening to them, but then I couldn't sleep on myself for like the next few days. So these stories are fascinating. And there's like so many like when I will go to the movie theaters or like just on YouTube, like I will see like commercials of things and I'm like, that sounds like a good story. I will want to know what happens next. But I'm also like not gonna watch it. So I was like this like ambivalence of like it's a really good story, but it's scary. So I don't want to watch it. Um
So I will actually give you if you're really into storytelling,
mhm.
and I will give you two literary recommendations.
All right.
The first one would be The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker.
I have that. It's in my. I have that. Yep.
What
Please
is that
read it if
about?
you haven't read it. So it is
Hellraiser.
Hellraiser.
It's
It's the
Hellraiser.
Hellraiser, but it's when you read the book, it's a lot more of a love story than it is an actual. So it's kind of like a gothic romance,
Okay.
It's
but it
also
is
a lot
good.
more graphic.
It's a lot more graphic. It's a novella, and then you kind of have to have like a little bit of context for it. But Doctor Sleep is another book I would recommend by Stephen King. I have never wept so hard at the end of the book. It is in Stephen King is just he has the reputation he has for a very, very good reason.
But that gets into a bunch of the deeper aspects that storytelling, and especially horror stories, has been something we have been telling since as far as we've had campfires, since
Oh
the
yeah.
dawn of human society and ability to tell stories. What we're also dealing with, especially nowadays, is the ability to produce so much of that in a very visual media and having a more visual language for it versus what's always been either in a written or verbal storytelling environment. Now, that also keeps in mind, though, as you're saying about Hellbound Heart, how much does that actually diverge from the movie and the story that gets turned into the movie versus the novella?
It's
So
like an
that's actually a very key thing. Because I've read it and I've done a comparison of the novella with the movie. There's some key aspects that have changed, but it actually, because Clive Barker, the author of it,
directed it.
he was directing and wrote the script version for it. So he actually like kind of edited his own novella, and
Yeah.
I think it made it better because in the novella, our main character Nancy, she was actually supposed to just be a neighbor, but in
Mhm.
the movie it's a daughter, so it's a bit more of a better connection to the whole system. Now I will say he did have to edit some things because he can get away with writing anything in a book, and back in the 80s you were
Yeah.
limited you were limited to what you could do. There's a specific scene where he's reanimating and There's a lot of things left out of that reanimation scene, but
Yeah.
other than that, it's pretty one for one, I will say.
It is one of the it's one of the very rare examples
Yes.
of that I've seen of like books being transformed into movies. And some of that is like Barker kind of tweaking the story. Some of it is like studio involvement. Like the book takes place in like London, and I think the movie takes place in like Brooklyn. So
Right.
it is
That's a very rare
yeah.
case of,
Yeah.
but that's because Clive Barker was involved in every step of the process for the first 2 Hellraisers. Now, if we diverge to other stuff, that's a whole other story.
Well,
Yeah.
but I was gonna ask though. Okay, so like, what is horror? Like, what? Because I always think, like, whenever I think about it, I think about like Chucky and like, all these like I'ma kill you kind of movies.
It's
Or
a pet peeve of
ghosts.
mine. It's a pet peeve of mine because it tends to be that whenever you get what I'll call an elevated horror film that is getting awards attention and that sort of thing, there's a lot of critics or folks that will say, "Oh, well, that's not horror, that's suspense." And it's like,
Yes.
well, basically the difference between horror and suspense is it's good, and it kind of bothers me because you go, okay, well, then that means Alfred Hitchcock, there's no horror there. I mean, it's because I understand
Right.
it's suspense, but to me, there is a wide range of what I accept as horror. Whether it's horror comedies and there's the slasher films and the psychological stuff and the thrillers, all of that stuff can be scary as hell. You've got police thrillers that are freaking scary,
Yeah.
that have horror elements. So I'm not a snob that will say, well, Hereditary is not a horror film because, I mean, look how good it is. No,
No, it's
it's
a horror film and it's really good.
it's a horror film. It just doesn't have a clown going around killing people. I mean, so I've got a pretty big definition of it, but some of the others may disagree. Or
It's
no.
Go ahead, Perry.
No, because I think that's one of the biggest things about it's the aspect of suspense. All of this also very much comes back into how our nervous systems regulate and what our nervous systems need, and let alone what do we need to be able to sense in. And I'm going to talk a little bit. Then I got to close some blinds. I forgot about the sunlight coming in. But it's also very much about what's going on in our nervous system and what are we either connecting to or what have we been ignoring. And again, every story has gone through some sort of iteration, but it's also going to be reflected of what we need. For example, I was at a spiritual convention and I was talking with somebody who was talking about the movie The Skeleton Key with Jennifer
Kate Hudson. Kate Hudson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kate Hudson, that's the one. In it, and he, as another black man, was having a difficulty connecting with it because the aspect of who was the intended audience. The intended audience was essentially white and focusing on what was horrific for this white blonde-headed woman versus what would have been horrifying for us as black people would have actually meant the movie actually was started in an entirely different place, looking at the trauma that was being held on by the slaves and what did they choose to do to escape that horror. And that is an aspect of what's going on in our nervous systems of whether we needed to be able to sense something or somebody else needs to sense something. And that becomes also part of what we're seeing with the idea that, yeah, some of us are just really tired of the gore fest. How is it actually moving us along? How is it actually generating a effect in our nervous systems that we need to be able to feel and not just intellectually step away from?
And also, I mean, not to interrupt, but the audience in horror for the African American audience, Latino audience is huge. And so
Oh my gosh, yes.
Kind of based on what he was saying, horror movies are made for white people a lot. I mean, there's not enough diversity. I think that that's certainly growing. But I
have to disagree with you
Same.
there horrendously because some of the scariest movies I've ever seen originated from Korea or Japan.
Mhm.
Oh no! I meant in Hollywood.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Of
okay.
course. There's. I mean, you want to talk about
I was
other? Yeah, I'm
I
talking
was gonna
specifically
say
about. Yeah, I'm talking specifically
okay.
about movies in American theaters.
Fair
That
enough.
the American
Fair
public
enough.
is talking
Okay.
about. Yeah. Oh
Because I was going to be like, sir, we're about to have some fisticuffs going.
no.
But that also
Obvious.
adds to, yeah. But that also very much illustrates one of our issues about the idea of defining horror, because there's also
Mhm.
cultural horror, and it's
Yeah.
going
Yes.
to be very different depending on where it is in the world and how that's going to be viewed versus, say, suspense.
Yes.
So that's such a broad area that you're never going to probably be able to properly define it, no matter how many people are in the room.
Isn't
Yeah.
it like that quote where it's like, I don't know how to define it, but when you see it, you know it?
Mhm.
So I just would give, speaking of quotes, the one of the masters of horror, Wes Craven, said the power of horror lies in its ability to confront us with our deepest fears, and it's essentially this, like, he described it almost kind of like this like vacuum effect, to where you're allowed to like confront your fears, whether it is home invasion, a serial killer, whatever the fear is. It allows you to confront that in a confined space, live vicariously through those characters, and then kind of go about your life.
You can still turn on the lights at the end of it.
Yeah.
Same principle of why people like roller coasters. It's controlled chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you can watch a horror film, and I mean, it's the cliche of don't run upstairs, but you can kind of work through the situation in your own mind of, well, here's a trauma. How would I manage that trauma? Obviously, the trauma in our own lives hopefully doesn't involve a guy in a hockey mask hunting us, but uh, there is a psychological benefit to sitting down, being confronted with potential death, and surviving and getting out on the other side, of placing yourself in, the final girl or whatever trope you want to use, and surviving. There is a psychological benefit. Before I started the nonprofit, I wanted to go out to horror conventions and speak on behalf of other nonprofits, and I heard a lot of, "Oh man, that's awful dark." The people there are really dark, and they're really depressed, and they're really, and I was like, "Well, yeah. I mean, if you not to say you want to fix the broken, but if you want to fix the broken, you go where the broken people are." And I think that horror isn't. They're not disturbed or psychologically damaged because of horror. They sought out horror as a way to deal with the psychological damage they got from society or their parents or what have you. This is not, everything was fine, and then they watched, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it ruined them. No, they're finding solace in the dark places that they can then survive. So I think that horror has a needless bad rep from certain corners of intellectual thought.
I would like to like kind of piggyback off what you
Mhm.
just said. So the fact that like you do go to the conventions, like I'm an avid horror convention goer. I'm also an avid like Comic-Con goer. Now, I had been going to Comic-Con a lot more than horror conventions. I've actually almost basically essentially retired from Comic-Cons, and I've solely focused on horror conventions. And that's because I've personally gone through trauma at Comic-Cons. My friends have personally gone through trauma at Comic-Cons. Either it was abuse or judgment or all these awful situations. I'm not going to go into detail, but it was not the best environment. Now, not to say that I didn't have great times at Comic Cons and I didn't meet great people. Do not get me wrong, but every single horror convention I've been to has honestly been some of the most uplifting, loving people I have ever met. There's been times when like I was like crying on the ground, and 50 people came over to me like concerned. If I was at a Comic-Con, that wouldn't have happened. There, and it is because of like a shared trauma. Like they understand and they want to be there for you. Like I said, it's been some of the nicest people, some of the most encouraging, some of the most uplifting people I have ever met in my entire life is at these horror conventions. And it's not only the vendors with the cosplayers, it's also like the guests they get there, all these panelists and things. Like I've never been so welcome and wholesome. Is because it I guess it's sort of like you were saying, like kind of like a trauma bond, like an unspoken trauma bond. And it's I've never been so accepted and so loved at horror conventions, like compared to anything else. Like if that's what I would like to say.
I think that's because horror and this question of what is horror is multifaceted. It
Yes.
is an element of cultural storytelling. It is how the responses that we have to the material or when it hits us in our different lives. And one of the contingencies that I always have at cons when we get talking about certain films is Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie is a very divisive filmmaker. When I tell people that the tattoo on my hand is Michael Myers from Halloween 2, specifically his, they kind of shrug it off. And for me, Halloween 2 came out almost 8 months after I lost a friend to suicide. And if you've seen that movie, then you know that there's a trio of characters where you're just seeing how they're all responding to trauma. And the DVD came out like right around the 1 year anniversary, like a week or so of his death. And I just watched that movie on nauseam. And we screened it this year because it's the 15th year anniversary. We screened it at the at our film festival, Horrific Hope in Winchester, and I explained that to story. And I feel like when people kind of have a context for why you gravitate towards a film or a fandom or a franchise or a specific author, they have a stronger understanding. It's like, okay, well, this means something to someone. And it's because of X, Y, and Z. And that's the great thing about horror is that also you can have something like I don't know if you guys anyone's seen I Saw the TV Globe.
I haven't yet. It's on my list.
Freaking phenomenal film. And but it's made by a trans director, Jane Schoenbrunn, I think. They had directed the film We're All Going to the World's Fair a couple years ago. Streaming on right now on Max, but it's very much an allegory for what it's like for an individual to not feel like they belong and kind of transitioning that process for them. I didn't get that because I'm not in that community. I didn't get that my first watch, but I like sat back and I've seen it 3 times now, and like it hits harder and harder every time. But it's a horror film that I feel like kind of, again, it goes with that notion of horror is multifaceted, and the same piece of media is going to mean different things to different people despite their backgrounds and experiences.
I'll give you I mean, we're just chatting here for a few hours. I'll give you a couple of examples. There is a film that's not really well known, but it's called The Last Will and Testament of Rosalind Lee. It is about a guy whose mom, who was a very strict religious kind of zealot. The whole house is full of creepy angel statues and stuff. She dies. He goes to the house to kind of deal with the post-death belongings and stuff. And so he's kind of confronted with the religious trauma that he grew up with. And maybe the house is haunted, maybe it's not, maybe it's in his head. And I've seen that film 3 times, and every time I watched it, I left thinking, oh, it's actually about this. Good horror, well, there's different kinds of good, but when you're talking about that, a horror movie can really hit you emotionally and connect with the traumas of your life, or the things you've been through, the things you are going through, in a way that, I mean, as much as I love superhero movies, in a way that they kind of don't a lot of times. The thing that really started Geek Wellness Education started as a podcast called This Podcast Will Save the World. It's now in a nonprofit that goes all over the place. It started with a movie called Starfish. There's a poster right behind me. And I watched that film and I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks. It's about a lady who, gosh, all the films that touch me seem to be about someone dying in the beginning. But it's about a lady whose friend, whose best friend passed away, and she again goes to her apartment and kind of is around her stuff, feeds her animals. And when she wakes up in the next morning, the world has been overtaken by monsters from another dimension, as it would. The movie is really all about grief. It's about guilt. It's about, if I'm going to save my world, I'm going to have to step into some dangerous things for me mentally, emotionally. One, do I deserve this? Two, can I face this new reality? Because I don't know. I mean, when you change your life, what is it going to be? It's a mystery. So to me, it hit me in a really profound way because of the stuff that I've been through in my life, where I've been, dealing with anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation for most of my life. It hit me that way. My now wife saw it and went, I didn't like it. Sorry, Al. But because she has not experienced those things. And so when she watched the movie, she was like, oh, it's about those things. So I think that, if you're someone who's dealt with a lot of these mental health issues like I have, like anxiety and depression and all that stuff, there's going to be horror movies that are going to hit you, and it's just going to speak to you in that really, really intense way that is really can be overwhelming. And then you think it's not just a movie about beings from another dimension taking over the world. So
I have a question now. So lately we have seen a slight shift in what we see as the villains. Before it was like, it's just this evil person that's doing evil things, and now it's like, well, it's just this person that has a reason, but they're kind of going about it the wrong way, doing these things. So there's more understanding as to the villains. But in horror, like, who or what is the villain?
That's a
Yeah.
layered question, because it delves into the type of horror, I would say. So if you want to go like old school, like monster horror, you have your Frankensteins, your Draculas, your Mummy, your King Kong, so like that's your classic horror villains, your classics, like your first idea, your first iteration of horror. But then you have such things as like psychological horror, where it could be just this person who wants chaos, or it could be like a gore fest, where it's just obvious from the get-go who it is, because they're already covered in blood before you meet them. It's so layered, and I think it's just like anything. Nothing is black and white. There's a lot of gray. So like just like any other genre, you have
Good guys and bad guys.
yeah, well, not just that, but it varies. Like
Sure.
you take romance, there's drama romance, there's rom-coms, there's things like that. And it's the same with horror. I think as myself and Perry and all, we said we like psychological horror. It's not always the gore fest or the monsters that we're gravitating to. Perfect example, actually, Liz, if you want like a very basic baby step into horror, there is a 10 episode micro series. It ranges from 10 to 15 minute episodes. It's 10 episodes It's a cartoon. It's called Over the Garden Wall. I actually have a tattoo of it.
Oh.
I have a tattoo of it. And it's might be like a cartoon. It might be for kids, but there is a horror basis, and it does tackle a lot of mental health things. The main villain is the Beast, and he's very dark and mysterious, and it's this horror undertone. And they're always put in these horrific situations, but it's like also very sweet and cute and kid and comedic, but again, it's still tackling these major mental health issues. So I feel like that's a good. I personally am obsessed with it, not gonna lie. I've cosplayed as one of the main characters, Greg, and I had my own little Mr. President Frog. I have the tattoo of it. I have all the comics that they made after the fact. Like, yes, I'm a little biased, not gonna lie, but it's really good, and it's like I said, it's a baby step into horror. You could show it to your kids, you can show it to adults, and everyone's gonna get a little something different from it. I think also like Tim Burton is fantastic with like beginner horror, something to tiptoe into that genre, because you have things like Nightmare Before Christmas, you have Edward Scissorhands. Like it's that kind of like pre-step into horror. It's still technically horror, but it's a lot more psychological. You're getting the dark aspects, but it's not going to scare you really. So I think something like that would be really good, like baseline, I would say. But
Yeah.
again, it's so hard to navigate the question, which is like who is good and who is bad, because just like everything else in life, there's so many facets to it. Like for example, when we were just interviewing, Liz and I were just interviewing Bill Kimberlin, who is a expert in serial killers and death row. All these people, they're villains, but they're like, oh well, I did it because, and they had like a reason behind it, so they're not the villain in their own mind, but we all know that they are. It's that weird
The, in,
fine line.
the
Yeah.
impact that it's actually had in the physical world, which is going to be very different in versus what's in the mind and the intent in the vision. And
Yes.
even to that standpoint, so we're talking about the various levels of it, there's also the various levels that people can process horror at. Some people need a physical villain to be able to represent or figure out where they're putting their focus, to
Yes.
the more nebulous horror, which is the beast or the darkness or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And it's also going to be reflective again of where is somebody feeling frightened about. One could say the movie 1984 is also the fears of the greater society.
Yeah.
Even though it's going to be listed as a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
Liz, you know how you are with Boone? That's how Perry is with me. He takes all the blob I say and like he refines it. He takes what I have in my brain, refines it, and makes it concise and blows me out of the water. So thank you.
I think that there is a there is a trend now to develop your bad guys. Back in the day, I mean, they say, oh, in fact, you beautifully talked about Rob Zombie's Halloween, and there was a lot of blowback to, well, why are you explaining the villain in these? I want Michael Myers to be evil for the sake of evil, and there was a lot of that. Why is Jason a bad guy? I mean, because camp counselors need to go. But I think, let's be honest. So they did let a boy swim, and they weren't watching; they were too busy making out. But now
he wasn't even the main villain. His mother was.
Yeah, exactly.
Spoiler alert: we're trying to get Liz to come
Yeah.
into the genre. Spoiler alert.
So
She'll forget in 5 minutes. It's fine.
So you've got things like Split now, which goes much deeper into the life of the killer, and you really explore a lot of that. I mean, let's give some praises. The Babadook, which is really an exploration of someone's who's just dealing with, oh boy, have you ever
Also-
seen someone more tired?
Can we also just love the fact that the Babadook is like officially, unofficially, like the LGBTQ like horror mascot?
Mascot, yeah.
Oh sure, yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
I
yeah,
love
yeah.
it. I love it.
So
Well,
yeah,
it's
Go
become
ahead.
one, but there have been other
Oh, I know. I'm just
queer-centered monster or
no, since
killer
he was
series
just talking
too. So,
about
yeah.
he was just talking about that movie,
Sure.
I just, I wanted to mention it. But yes, there has
Yeah.
been so many. Yes.
Yeah, but I think that the fact that there is an effort on whether it's explaining why Magneto or Killmonger wants to be the bad guy in a superhero series, and then
Or
of
the
course they have to
Joker.
or the Joker, which they say, oh, it's a ripoff of these other films. Well, guess what? I'm a genre fan. I never saw those other films. Okay, so that's great. I don't watch gangster movies. I'm too busy watching superheroes and horror. But yeah, I think that there is that push to give not sympathy, but to explain what got them into that position. It's definitely a different type of horror movie because you're not just saying, here's a maniac with a knife and he's going to spend the next 90 minutes killing people. There is a lot more, I guess, storyline depth, that sort of thing to it.
Which is also reflective of where we are in our journeys as a society.
Mhm.
Because I mean, again, right now, and especially after basically this decade, we've gone in this decade, more people are more aware of mental health issues than ever
Yes.
before. And again, going back to what we saw in the 80s, or that aspect of they're just running around killing, you never needed to know about the person dealing with mental health on the corner of the
I was gonna
street
say,
screaming.
the
Yeah.
Sure.
A24 has launched has taken, I feel, horror from because horror had a down slump for a while,
It always does.
and but A24 has brought it right back up.
A24 gets too much credit. I mean, Shutter and Screambox. Let's not
Yes,
forget about
yes,
the little guys.
I do love
Um,
Shudder and Screambox.
It's
Please.
budget. It's all about the budget.
Yeah.
Well,
but
A24 has low budgets though.
yeah, they do.
So,
To
Compared to other Hollywood productions, yes.
yes.
And who they
Probably
can pull
larger
in.
than what Shudder is dealing
No,
with.
Shudder's been fantastic as
Yeah.
well. There's a lot of Shudder originals that I love too. But
to kind of go off of a lot of what the three of you guys are saying, I think it also comes down to trends as well. A lot of this like explaining is something that we're seeing more in the last 15 to 20 years in the genre. Whereas when you go back to the era that Hope originally was talking about to Liz about like the monster era, it was kind of very much a more lighthearted affair. Then you have like the Abbott and Costello era that kind of spun off of that to where you now have goofiness, and then you give it a couple of decades and now you have birth to trauma. But the scene that like just kind of that's been in my mind hearing Hope and a lot of you other guys talking about specifically is the scene from New Nightmare, where it's the talk show and Freddy, Robert Englund comes out in full Freddy, and the camera just pans to him, and it's just his shadow with the glove, and then the camera pans around, and you're just seeing kids that are cheering on, and it's this very meta commentary on how the slasher boom kind of made us cheer for the bad guy for a long time. And
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Sure.
I know you're talking about New Nightmare, but the only thing I can think of is Nightmare 3, where he's like, "Welcome to primetime, bitch," and shoves her into the TV.
one of
Hey,
the great classic
listen.
gags.
Every movie needs a Dokken soundtrack. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. But yeah, it's.
But yeah, I think it's trends. I think, as Dave has mentioned several times, this trend of elevated horror, where you have things like A24 films, the Babadook, the IFC,
Wait, okay.
a lot of
What's
Jordan Peele's
A24?
films. It's a
Okay,
studio.
so A24
Oh.
is a production studio. They do a lot more than horror.
They
It's
do.
been a lot honestly, A24 is really setting the groundwork not only for like not only for like horror, but I think I would say like better working relations with between actors and directors and production companies. They've been like the forefront. Like even during the writer's strike and everything like that, A24 was still allowed to work because they went above and beyond and went
Yep.
more so into the labor rights of everybody, and they respected it. So like it's been pretty phenomenal to have this company who's like listening and producing quality work. Not to say that every single one of its films is like 10 out of 10, but like
No.
it's it's definitely pushing a more ethical and better way to produce films. So and it's like for the smaller guy, it started out with like smaller people with smaller budgets, but good ideas. So
Yeah, they're kind of the Netflix of the indie world, where like Netflix will just like, you have an idea and they'll just greenlight it. But yeah, to go off what Hope was saying, during the writer's strike, they were the first and I believe only studio for a
yes.
couple months that actually like, these are all your terms and conditions, we'll sign it. They really valued human life in that instance.
And this is just in the whole movie and television production. We're not even talking about the, say, written word in the novels and so forth.
And the
Which
comics.
was
Oh my god.
comics
So
were.
many or anime. Anime. Can I
Mhm.
that's a whole other and horror anime, horror comics. I'm a huge fan of horror comics. Have any of you ever heard of Nailbiter?
I
The
have the
com
first, yeah, I have the first one up there out in my living room. But yes, great book.
such a
It's good.
good horror like thriller comic.
Or
It's yeah.
no, finish what you're saying. Just
Oh
trying to think
no,
of
no,
names.
please. You're reading my
Oh, okay.
mind, so you're fine.
Well, because the few that I know, at least I've been able to have the time to read, were like the House of Slaughter, which is connected to what's killing our kids. There's also Nettie Wiles' blog. I know there's one of the indies that I have helped kickstart was called Gorgon, which is another example of it. So the genre and the variety of horror is across a large field, not just what we're seeing in movie production
Yes.
houses.
Thank
Very
you
much.
So
for, yeah, I was just gonna say thank you for bringing that up, because I was like, are we just sticking to movies? Because I mean, the genre is like like we said at the beginning, like, and throughout the conversation, it's multifaceted. It's not just what we could put on the silver screen or television or a streaming service. I mean, it is comics, it is anime, it is games.
Games, yes.
yeah, Call of Cthulhu.
Mhm.
There's a number of
That's
RPG games that are coming out that are all horror centered. I mean, technically, Alien
Betrayal.
itself,
I love Betrayal.
Betrayal on the Haunted Hill. There's plenty of ones that are connected to the Lovecraft universe, despite his issues. But
We're not going to talk about that,
we're
okay,
not going
Perry?
there.
We're not
We're
going
not
to go
going there.
there. That's a
There's
whole
already
other
many
episode.
treatises on that.
That's a whole other
But that
episode,
sense that there
sir.
is a lot of places. I mean, just what I'm saying about what I get to do over on Symphony, which I will recommend if anyone's going to have another panel, talk to Bridget Jeffries on that. She's also an affiliate with Chaosium and Call of Cthulhu. But just the other places that we are also exploring horror is not just limited to what's going on the movie screen. And it may be one of those things that for you, Elizabeth, you may not be someone who needs to be going into the movie direction. You might be
Yep.
more interested in going into the book direction,
Yes.
the comic books, playing the games that are centered to help you begin to feel more comfortable with horror.
Well, yeah, because I was thinking about like, because when Hope said anime, I was like, well, yeah, I'm more willing to like watch an anime that's like scary, that's opposed to like real people. 'Cause I guess that just makes it more real for me and also more scary.
Now,
Josh, do you have a question? Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, like, just going off of like Hope's earlier experience, one of the things that we are such big champions for over at Victims is the idea of community and the impact that it has on your mental health. And hearing her talk, about going to conventions and stuff like that, and then hearing what Perry talks about of horror being, an RPG, video games, comic books, anime, like it is, even if it's not the movies that are getting you and connecting with you and allowing that community to grow, there are multiple other different avenues that are connected to different communities with the opportunity to really have an impact on your mental health and your emotional growth journey.
Yeah, just some of the video games of the last few years. There's Project Callisto. There's The Chant, The Quarry, Dead Space, which has also had this
Oh my
animated
God,
series of
yes.
those aspects. I mean, depending on how you feel about it, Resident Evil as well. And then there's the Silent Hill.
Hill, or
Yeah.
yep.
So there's some other avenues that might be more of a better palette for you to be able to enter into horror than just movies.
So I have a question real quick for all of you guys. Like I guess as like a mid
Only I can ask the questions.
I'm your brain, it's fine. I'm your brain. I can do what I want. So, you wouldn't so just like I guess as like a mid episode like break, so to say, like I would like to know one by one, like each of your like what is like your top 3 horror go-tos, like whether it's a movie, a comic,
Oh, I was gonna
or
ask
TV.
that
Well, then
later.
then copy my thing and ask now.
Hey, it's in the brain share. You're both thinking about it.
It's collective.
All right, Elizabeth, would you like to ask that question then?
No, I actually, because we were talking about sort of like how it's in like in different genres and like horror and like what hits you and stuff. And then so I was like, okay, well then how does watching all those like serial killer documentaries like sort of like come into play? Is that sort of like a side thing of horror,
Are
or
you
is it
talking
like an
about true
introduction of
crime
it?
or
Yeah.
Horror adjacent is what I would
Yeah.
say it is.
Okay.
I know for me, I don't know if this is the direction you were going in, but like I know for me, given my previous relationship with horror and how unhealthy it was, I now need to put up barriers for myself. So I was really big into true crime, and now I'm at a place where I can't take it anymore.
You need a break once in a while.
Yeah. So like I will basically be like, oh, like I haven't watched Halloween in a while, like John Carpenter's. So like let me throw that on, and it's something simple, it's nice and relaxing. Or Frankenhooker, to see hookers explode and be all over the place. Just be something goofy and fun. But for me, I know that there are emotional ties to this genre, and I need to protect my own mental health and to put barriers up as well. And so that for especially for like the real life stuff, like I'm just like pause.
Well, not
None.
just the real life stuff, but there are certain horror films that do drive to the extreme. That I don't even think.
Oh,
Yeah.
ouch.
Yeah, that'll
Thanks.
be
What a
That'll be
terrible
rough.
story. I mean, it just, I mean,
Thanks. But also, if we were talking like in a
I have
film,
no idea
as-
what's happening.
if you don't know the story behind the girl next door, it's horrifying.
it's
Okay.
if we're
horrifying.
talking about like in a movie sense, though, there are some in the horror genre that I think it does go too far. It's like it goes too hard for the sake of wanting to just be too hard. And some of
Shock,
those,
yeah.
like I would avidly tell people not to watch. Maybe some of those would be like Cannibal Holocaust, Martyrs, Serbian film.
Uh,
It's torture porn in
yeah,
so to say.
Mm.
It's
you
not
could
even horror.
throw you could
It's
throw Saw, Hostel, Human Centipede into that conversation.
I I I guilty pleasure love some of those, but
I mean, me too, but
no, but I know what you're saying.
So it goes too hard, you mean on like the visuals of it?
yes, those
Well,
go for
and
it.
there are certainly some. I mean, there's some smaller franchises that are just gore and murder for the sake of it. Obviously, I support art and censorship is bad and all that stuff, but there are some that, I mean, that make things like Human Centipede Part 2 and stuff seem quaint.
Yeah, they
And
make it
Human
seem like
Centipede Part
a
3.
child's play.
I
literally.
have a hard time connecting with those types of things that are extreme beyond what Saw does and beyond what some of those other franchises do, because I just it's an hour and a half of blood and killing and look what we can do, but I don't, other than that, how are you going to hook me? And so there's some that I would not recommend to you as a newbie or even as someone who's been watching it.
So just to kind of answer, I guess, your question, Liz, we talked about trends earlier. There was I guess maybe like a year or two after 9/11 happened, there was a wave of horror films that lasted probably like 10 years, and they were just like violent,
The early aughts,
yeah, vicious, like they were just brutal. And
Funny
it wasn't
Games.
Yeah, Funny Games is a great example. It wasn't just here in the States, though. There was a huge movement over in France with the extremists. High Tension's a great example of that. Irreversible is a
Ouch.
masterpiece, but it is not for the faint of
I'm
heart.
sorry, anything with Gaspar Noé as well.
That's fair.
I love the man. He's brilliant, but goddamn.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like the people that grew up watching this sort of like like monster horror or like
We're all
like
fucked
slasher
up,
films.
Liz. We know.
No, no, we're like what I'm trying to say is that they sort of like grew up and then they're like, hell, I love these movies, but we can like level up. Like there's so much to explore, and like so from what you're saying, it sounds more like it switched to just being like this scary visuals to like the scary storytelling.
Yeah.
Yes.
So kind of there's a level of horror, and that is just like it leaves you insatiable. To where it's like I don't know how many of you guys have seen In a Violent Nature, but it's pretty brutal. And like if you've seen Terrifier 2, the bleach scene, or
I feel like Terrifier 2 is, yes, it's bloody and gory, but it's kind of like in such a comedic way that whereas like other films like Martyrs is bloody and gory for the sake of bloody and gory, not just
Sure.
like
But what I'm saying is like, when you read or watch interviews with Damien Leone, obviously the first thing that came out of the original Terrifier was the bone scene. That was kind of the one that took everyone by surprise, kind of made Art the Clown really phenomenal. So from that way, I go back to this idea of horror being insatiable. It's like, okay, how are you going to top that? And so that's where you have the bleach scene, comedic or not. Like it's always about topping what kind of came before it. I mean, it's part of the reason that like In a Violent Nature is getting talked about the way it is because there is a very particular scene that rivals something along those lines. It's very brutal, but I don't know. I have a love-hate relationship with it because I love horror to see how creative the filmmakers can get with the gags, but also at the same time, it is fairly brutal.
I have a question for everybody as well. So like I said previously before, I have a background in crime scene and biohazard remediation. So that was literally my everyday life, was cleaning up these horror scenes in multifaceted ways. Now, so to me I am very unfazed. So it's when all of you are talking about this, like I'm just like, oh, when I see those scenes, I'm like, well, that's how they should clean this up, and that actually needs 3 boxes to go to the biohazard thing, and blah blah. Like I break it down in that sense, like every time. I'm just like, oh yeah, that'll take about 3 days to clean that, and blah 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 blah. So like how does that process in each of your minds? Because again, I am numb to that because of my background, but everyone's background differs. So like how does it process for you guys?
I'll say for mine, it's watching something, and this is a bigger issue just in life in general, is when does it trip my therapist's mind to start thinking about, oh, this person's trauma, this family structure
Right.
issue, this relational issue is like, shut up. I just want to have something I can not
Yes.
have to think about that
For,
when I'm
for
watching TV. And it's resulted in actually I watch a lot less. I haven't doing much more of the gaming and so forth because
Okay.
I can't, on one hand, predict what's going to happen in the same way I can with scripted material.
Right.
Fair.
It's also a reason
I
why, again,
feel that so much.
when getting off work, it's like I'd rather watch sci-fi than I would watch something that is going to continue. It's like reality TV is junk to me. It's the worst thing possible because I
Look.
know that it's being staged, and that staged
I will
doesn't trip
say
well.
one of my best guilty pleasures ever is on Shudder, and it's Dragula, and it's the Boulet Brothers Dragula. It's reality TV, but it's horror drag, and it's amazing. And I just want everyone to watch it because it's horror drag, and it's just so good.
wait,
But
what's
go on,
Shutter? So I thought Shutter was a movie. It's not a movie, is it?
No,
So
it's a
there
Shudder
channel.
is another stream. Yes, there is Shutter, which is
Yes.
Shutter. That is a movie, but
Mhm.
Shudder Shudder is
Ah.
a streaming service solely for horror.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, to answer your question, I talked about this earlier, but I don't have any fancy backgrounds into like Hope or Perry. So
I'm
for
not
me, it's
fancy. I'm a glorified janitor. But go on.
it's just I have a movie recommendation for you. I think it's still on Paramount, but it's called One Must Fall.
Okay.
I think you'd
What's
really
that
like
about?
it. So it's an indie movie that I got a chance to see a couple years ago while covering a film festival. But essentially, it's about a girl that starts a new job so that she can take care of her kid, and it's crime scene cleanup. And on her first day, they get stalked by basically get trapped by a serial killer while cleaning up one of his messes. So
How do you process these? Like, because like with Perry, it's hard for him to process these things, just like with me, because we go into like a work mind with these things. So like Dave, how do you and Josh, how do you process these gore scenes? Like, because it's so curious to me because that's blocked off for me. I can't sit and enjoy like some people can, because just like Perry said, it's like, oh, this is kicking in. Oh, this is kicking in. So like, how do you process these movies?
I think that if in most cases it's not, I mean, it's not real blood. It's not, so no real person's being hurt. So most of the time I find that I'm able to slip into that childhood thought process of when we would go and rent a movie from Blockbuster and bring it home on a Friday night, and me and my friends were like, yeah, get them. Like, because it's just silliness. There are times like when I talk about if we're going really extreme, like August Underground or something like that, where I go, come on, guys, can't you do a little something creative with this? I mean, does it have to be just this? And in those cases, I just start worrying for the filmmakers. Sorry, but yeah, for the most part, if it's a guy with a knife hacking people up, I'm able to kind of put myself in a situation of just the viewer enjoying what's coming to me.
Mhm.
And I tend to have like a second gear when it comes to the elevated horror stuff that really gets me emotionally. And for instance, when I saw Midsommar or Midsummer, however you want to pronounce it, when I saw that movie, I saw it with a big group of friends on opening night, and I came out, and when it ended, and I won't spoil it because it's an amazing film, but when it ended, I came out and I was so happy. And I was like, isn't it great? Wasn't the ending wonderful? And all of my friends looked at me and went, are you out of your freaking mind? They're like, are you, this is not a happy ending. And I was like, what are you talking about? No, it was a great ending. And so I think that when it comes to stuff like that, I'm able to more put on my my trauma cap and identify with a film that is trying to say something more to me than look how much blood we can spurt. I think that, once you've got it to where, where they're making a movie out of a Gwar concert, at that point, I'm not scared of that. I recognize it for the
Fair.
silliness that it is. And by the way, Gwar's awesome.
Oh, I love Gwar. Yes, love it.
Watch the Gwar documentary on Shudder if you haven't seen it yet. It's great.
I was gonna say, you're in Richmond. You're right near Gwarbecue all the time.
Yeah, both of us are.
It's yeah. It's
Well,
it's Gwar
I'm saying
Bar.
like they have barbecue one
Gwar-
every year.
Barbecue
So.
was they haven't had it since. I don't think they've had it since.
And that's
COVID.
where they hold it. Oh, really? I moved to Florida
Yeah,
during
that's fair.
COVID, so.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm a little bit opposite from you, everyone else on the panel. I love gore. I love blood. I love the guts element of it. But there are definitely times again where for me, I have to know my limits. So if I'm watching a film that, maybe we're podcasting about it and it's like, okay, I'm going to watch this and then I'm going to watch something lighthearted. Like Daria is like a huge comfort show for me. Like The Office, Simpsons, like having places put into practice where it's like, okay, I just sat through what should be a really horrifying thing. Now I need to laugh
Right.
and now I need to decompress. And that's oftentimes like the practices that I done, or I will go for a walk or listen to some music or kind of change my scenery and understand stuff like that. For me, like particularly like Dave just talked about, like hacking somebody up, I used to have really bad and really severe anger management issues, and so I would, anytime I was angry, I would throw on slashers, and I would throw on like brutal slashers, like the bloodiest, goriest I could find, and I would be like, oh, for me it was kind of like cathartic because I'd be like, oh, well, that's not really the killer and the victim on the screen. That's me and whoever I'm mad at, So like that for me was like took big realization that's like this is not healthy, and to a degree, I would say like just I don't like slashers nearly as much as I did back when I first got into the genre, but it also depends on my mood.
So, Liz, I'm totally taking this panel over at this point.
I have a question. Wait, let's ask the question and then we'll one.
So ask your question so I can ask mine.
So my question is, okay, because you guys have been here in this fandom for a while, and there's things that you're like, oh, not surprised, or like, super into that I would be terrified of. What is it, if you're comfortable with sharing, what are the ones that scare you now? Like, what are the themes that are scary to you, like actually like scare you?
As a husband, the thing that scares me most is being out and separated from my wife and not being able to like protect her, if that makes any sense. So like I mentioned it earlier, but like I watched Irreversible and like rape scenes for me are like a no-go when it comes to, they are instantly fast forwarded. If I am in a theater watching it, I will step out for 5 minutes. I don't care if I miss dialogue. That is just the one point that I just will not deal with when it comes to the genre. And so those are things that like legitimately scared me. I will also say The Strangers scared me. First time I saw that, just being home alone and just having somebody knock on your door doesn't go away. It's a terrifying film.
Dave?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was scared by the slashers, and for some reason I would go in the bathroom and like look in the shower to make sure Jason wasn't there. If he was, I'm not sure what 12-year-old me would have done. But for some reason I thought that was going to help. These days, there aren't undead maniacs with knives chasing me around. There aren't, I'm personal topic. I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in, possessions and demons and that sort of thing. So scary is really kind of, not really where I'm coming from at this point. I definitely, it does hit me. Anything like that's why the psychological stuff really gets me, is because stuff that can speak to me that, oh, this could be real, of someone. And I wish horror films did a little bit of a better job with having the good guys dealing with mental health issues, as opposed to explaining that this is, oh, well, the person's schizophrenic, so of course they're going around murdering a bunch of people.
Mm.
I get it, but I wish that there was a little bit more depth there with the heroes as well. But I think that anytime you're talking about something where it's a break in the human psyche, it's going to hit me a little bit better as scary, because we could know someone in that position, and the number, there's a number of great horror films that deal with schizophrenia and that sort of thing. In fact, I'll throw one out that it doesn't really count as a horror film, but I do. It's called Braid, and it's a really good movie from a few years back about three girls who had who used to play when they were kids, and they had like a little play reality, and now they're adults, and they reunite for reasons I won't get into, and they are still caught in that play reality. And so murders happen. How much of this is in their heads? So I think anytime you're dealing with something psychological, it's going to hit me on a unsettled level, which I guess is a version of fear. But yeah, I'm not necessarily afraid of a ghost or something like that.
Well, I am, but I used to joke because I don't watch like all these sort of like serial killer movies and stuff like that. So whenever my friends would talk about, it's like, oh, you had a horrible nightmare where like somebody was chasing me, and I was like, was it a spider? Because those are my nightmares. Like I hate spiders, and then just last night, so I graduated finally from college like in December. So, but last night I just had a dream where somebody told me I had to go back to school for another 4 years, and I just in my dream I was like just threw myself on the ground, and I was like, I can't do this. This is the worst. And then like
Crushed
the first
under the
class
weight
I
of
had,
loans.
yeah, just like math. That was the first class I had to take, and I was like, I can't. Like, and so those are my nightmares, the things I am afraid of. I hope, please, make
No,
me
well, what
seem
about
normal in some way.
I'll make everyone seem normal. So I am not scared of anything. Like horror movies don't scare me. However, I have an irrational fear. And this irrational fear is going to make everybody laugh. I don't care.
Spiders.
Is it leprechauns?
No, I actually own a pet spider.
and a
but-
pet leprechaun?
My irrational fear is butterflies.
That's an interesting one.
Quick, does
What-
anyone know of a horror film with butterflies?
The
My
butterfly
Maybe a few
effect.
sci-fi ones.
Yeah, the butterfly effect.
So, I actually know why after doing my psychology courses through college, I figured out why I have an irrational fear, even though I know why I have it, still can't get rid of it. But horror movie, horror comic, horror book wise, like nothing really scares me. I thoroughly enjoy it. And I think it's just maybe because it offsets my own personal life trauma so much that I can take comfort in knowing that, like, okay, maybe my trauma isn't as bad when going up against like all this other shit that's
Butterflies,
happening.
yeah.
Yes, against butterflies. Yes.
I mean, just to give you an example, though, there's an issue of a comic book that's not a horror comic book called The Max, and
Yes.
there's
God,
a,
what a great book.
there's a scene where Mr. Gone, the bad guy, has captured Julie, the social worker, and he's talking about how he's got her dressed up like a bunny, and he's talking about how, you're teasing us and, with looks, and the way he's talking sounded like what some crazed guy would say if he kidnapped a woman and was going to harm her. And that was so unsettling to me. And I remember after reading that issue, I was scared, in a sense of, there are people that really think this, that are out there. And, you feel for, as a dude, I don't know what it's like, but you never know who that person is that you could turn the wrong corner, and next thing you know, there's just some lunatic that's doing something. So yeah, not to hijack, but
Harry.
Well, the problem, I guess, on one of those aspects is it depends on which of my identities is holding the fear. In the standpoint, as a gay man, I am currently, in the reality we're living with, looking at losing all my rights, and how am I supposed to be able to live and function in this particular world?
Dude, I'm right there with you with
thoughts.
Handmaid's Tale. Actually, you know what? Handmaid's Tale scares the shit out of me. I'll say that.
Same.
Yeah, there's
Why
that,
is
and then
that
then there is also the racism standpoint. I mean, and that is also that standpoint. I mean, I forget exactly what the name of the movie was, but there was one where essentially they were taking young people and turning them into hamburger to feed at a restaurant chain. And the aspect of it wasn't like they were killing anybody, but no, it was all the people of color. So it's that constant aspect, and that is a constant present fear that's got to be dealing with. There's also religious zealotry as another factor is there. So a number of my fears are the ones that are actually going on right now.
I feel you there. I mean, I thought I might have been stabbed one day when I was in New York, and there was a Westboro Baptist Church movement, and as I was making out with my girlfriend at the time, they walked by and they're like, "We're gonna go to hell," and I'm like, hi. Okay.
But
That's a good point that you brought up, Perry. It's like it depends on, because a lot of you guys said, hey, so as a, like, in general, it helps us sort of like process and sort of like overcome some of like that fear that we felt
Yeah.
before, due to trauma and stuff. But it also, like, current trauma, like whatever difficulties we're experiencing now, right? That those are the things that, because yeah, me too, like, I just, in general, I do avoid, like, depending on how I'm feeling, and I just avoid anything that I know is gonna like be a very big trigger for me, because I'm anxious at this moment, or because I'm scared of spiders, or whatever it may be.
Everyone send her all the spider horror movies now.
No. No, and why is it like, so it's one of the most common fears. So in every movie, whether it's a scary movie or not, there always has to be like a scary scene with a spider. Why No, it's not.
Let's be honest.
Easy
The
target.
scariest non-horror spider scene will always be Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
It's freaking terrifying.
like, okay, like, it kind of started with, like, Harry Potter and like all the spiders, but the Lord of the Rings, like Hobbit, yes, those are, I closed my eyes, and because I watched it in theaters, and I was like, just tell me when it's over, and I just like closed my eyes.
I'm not even afraid. Like, I'm not afraid of spiders, but that particular scene just makes me like unsettling, and like I'll see like videos of like Australian spiders in Australia, and I'm just like, oh dear God, nope, it's time to get off social media for a little bit.
Yeah, that's why Australia has been crossed. In that I'm never gonna go there ever, in my list.
On one hand, spiders ask for that creepy crawly, that alien thing, which gets into also that standpoint of what works with cosmic horror, that thing that is not going to be understood by all of us. There's also the one of the other bigger metaphors is that spiders are also associated with death and the cleanup process that comes with decomposition.
That's a good point.
Just an aside, does anyone remember the Creep Show when the roaches came out of the That freaked me out when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Uh,
God. What a.
we got go ahead.
Nope.
Yeah,
God.
but-
I'll need to relive
but
that
the-
scene.
Yeah, but that adds to
colors in
the
the movie, in the Mummy, like they go under your
right,
skin.
right, and that is one of those others, and which is a larger societal aspect is insects are associated with death and the decomposition process. And one of the biggest things, especially in Western culture does not deal well with death, which is why grieving is also a major theme that we see in so many horror movies, is the subject of what is our relationship with death? Because death is going to come no matter what, and every single person on this planet, whether it comes
do you mind if-
individually or as a group.
Do you mind if I ask you a question? Because I'm not an expert. I'm a patient. I've noticed a lot over the last several years. I mean, you could go back, but old people, especially naked old people, but old people are used in horror often. Is it because of that? Hey, they're closer to death, so it's going to strike, like a subconscious fear? Or, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, obviously, A24 is probably making 4 films right now about naked old people.
Well, whether it's in that, and so that can be one of those places of people processing the idea of aging. I mean, just look at the stories of Dorian Gray, which is a constant in that classic monster aspect. This is a monster that looks no different than everybody else. He just isn't aging, and all of his horror and ills that he's putting out around him and causing in the world show up on that painting. So the idea and the fear of aging and death is a major one of these places, let alone the aspect
Thinking of Deborah Logan, blah, blah, blah.
Well, not
Well,
even
and
just
there was-
that. There's I know just from growing up being around like certain peers and everything, like in my 20s, I remember like people who were like 29 would be like dreading turning 30 because they're like, oh, that means I'm old now. And I'm like, what? No, you're dumb. But like it's that like certain like fear, that innate fear. So I think that's what affects people.
And then there's also the standpoint of becoming, as we have often will see, is the fact of our mobility goes down, our ability to be the most effective person running from the monster or the bear. They're likely the ones to be gotten, and you're going to be able to get away. But that relationship with death, and that's also one of the biggest things with horror. If anything, that is the greatest monster in any horror movie.
Absolutely.
Is the idea of death.
Yeah, I think it also.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it also because we just talked about this last week on Abyss Gazing when we did X, now available wherever you get your podcast from. Is that film explores this idea of aging and beauty, but I think it also, part of it is not just death, but part of it is also how we as a society look at mental health. We don't want to talk about mental health because it means that there's something wrong with me, and I think that when you're faced with your own degree of immortality, or mortality rather, you are like, oh shit, I'm actually going to die at some point. And I think that's kind of a fear that could be common for a lot of folk, but also at the same time is like, you look at like how our culture nowadays actually treats the elderly, and I think that's also another fear as well.
Yeah, there was I think it was out of, I don't know which part of Europe it was from, but there was called The Old People, which basically had the senior citizens going out killing everybody younger than them. My cousin was watching it. I started watching over as I was doing other things as he was doing it, and they never explained why these elderly people are now going around slaughtering everybody younger than them. But it's basically death.
I just want them to stay off my lawn. That's all. I'm not there yet. I got a few more decades before I'm there. But
well, it has this idea of sort of like the unknown, because my anxiety, that is the worst thing that can happen, right? Cannot prepare for something I don't know it's coming. And in my head, now that you guys have talked a little bit about what you watch in movies and stuff, and I'm like, well, you guys are like pros at it now. So like we have an apocalypse. I told Hope already. I'm like, I'm just gonna like immediately go find you because you'll keep me safe because I will have no idea. I would just be trusting everybody. Like
I'm her bodyguard.
zombie. Yeah, I was like, I have no idea how to survive. And I feel like in some ways, like watching these movies kind of gives you there is a solution to this, right? So
Mhm.
like a lot of the times there's the whole meme of like, why are you going off by yourself? Why is everybody splitting up? You know you're
Yep.
not supposed to, right? And then so like it becomes a meme, but it's sort of like also something that can help you in real life, right? Like if you're struggling with a problem, don't isolate yourself, stay with your community and ask for
Yeah.
help and
Mhm.
help each other kind of thing. So it all these movies, I feel like you guys are massive expertise as to how to solve problems and how to keep yourself safe, because now you're
Well, but
like, there's movies.
But that comes again back to the aspects of what horror is. It's
Mhm.
talking about aspects of our own lives and society as we are trying to figure out how to deal with them.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
one of those other examples of just the aspect is Godzilla. When Godzilla was originally created in the 1950s, it was actually the methodology for Japanese people to deal with the concept of war and what it did to
And the nuclear
their island.
fallout. Yep.
Yep.
Exactly. And fears around that. To the aspect of then when they flipped it to being one of their heroes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we get the entire Kajaku genre of movies. But
Well,
the
like, and
Godzilla
also,
-1 was going back into that
Yep.
standpoint
The
of the fear of what
Oh,
Godzilla
yeah.
originally
God.
represented.
The fallout. Yeah.
it's also interesting to see how American filmmakers portrayed Godzilla as opposed to
Mhm.
Japanese ones.
Mm.
And also like we
Mhm.
have like different generations now, right? Where
We got a really
didn't
good
get
view of that
experience.
over the past year.
Well,
Mhm.
to kind of piggyback off that, like Hope brought up J horror earlier or K horror, where
Mhm.
it's when you and I've talked about the the French extremist movement of the early aughts. When you look at that's one of the things that I think Americans make. The majority of these big studios make movies that are popcorn. Like
Mhm.
when I came out of -1, I was like, God, this is a masterpiece. And then you go and you watch the new King, Godzilla X Kong, and it's like
Yeah.
this is just dumb sci-fi fun. It's two completely different things. But I think one of the best examples of this is uh it's either I'm pretty sure it's the Grudge, but like when you go back and you watch Ju-on from the late 90s, so much of that is steeped in what specifically how the country of Japan looks at ghosts and the subject of grief,
Mhm.
and that's what makes that movie so impactful. All of that is lost when you come over to the Sarah Michelle Gellar version of that character.
That or
Mhm.
Ringu versus Ring. Like
Yeah, that
I
character.
did a breakdown once between like Ring versus Ringu, and they tried to mimic everything from the original to an American remake. And first off, I was like, first off, this little 8-year-old kid in America would not go off by himself to school like that. Okay. Like, first off, that is a cultural thing that just would not
Mhm.
happen. They actually value their children and the safety of children in Japan. Like, their motto in Japan is basically like, the community raises the children. And
Yep.
so, and like the crime rates are nil there and all this stuff. So, like, yeah. Uh, but they also take a lot more pride. They're a lot more spiritual. They have a more open relationship with death over there as well, you know. And because of that relationship with death, they're more so aware of the fact of like being haunted by revenge of death. And
Mhm.
that's what, elevates that. Whereas in America, we're like, he dead, fuck it, like
Or that you
And
got the Catholic Church is going to come in here and
yes,
has some sort of spiritual thing that can take
Yep.
out these ghosts, these demons, and so
yes.
forth, and they will always win, which one could call its own form of church propaganda.
Sure.
Like all the new like the Omens, the Exorcist, all those. Yeah.
Or
and
even from
also
the
let the right one in and let me in. In some
The
ways,
original's so much better.
yeah, in some ways, similar films. You can look at it and say, well, that's the scene from that, and that's the scene from that. Obviously, there's some changes, but Let Me In is so American. It's interesting how when there are the same story or what have you that are told in the original, like in J horror, and then they remake it over here, how so much is lost, and a lot of it, as someone like me, I may not even pick up on it. The first time this is not horror, but the first time I watched Snowpiercer, I did not even remotely understand that it was commentary on Korea. And then after I learned that, I watched it again and went, oh, this movie's genius. And the people in Korea that are watching this movie must be hit a completely different level because it's speaking directly to the issues that affect them. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which comes back to the aspect of how much horror is also related to culture and whether it's going to hit or not, and be the success or not. Again, the relationship with death and what death means. I mean, yeah, like I said, somehow they always believe that the Catholic Church is going to come in, or these spiritual practices of Christianity are going to come in and rescue them, versus dealing with something that is an integral part of our nature and our existence, and that they can just wipe it all away. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, which fortunately there have been things like Dybbuk boxes and the Curse of La Llorona and stuff like that are kind of giving a different religious viewpoint to it. But it is very often, like what I was mentioning in American film, it is very often that boy, Catholicism is correct. In a lot of these films, it's you're gonna need a Catholic priest to come in and save the day, or get wiped out.
Yeah, because you never see a Protestant or a Lutheran or any of those other churches succeeding in taking out the vampire.
Very Catholic.
Don't even get into the other types of religion.
Yeah.
What other types? Hope?
I will see that and raise you the ending of The Exorcist Believer, where they brought in a whole crap ton of other.
We're not talking about that movie, okay?
It exists.
We're not talking about it.
Yeah, so I mean, it's good that they're starting to want to do other viewpoints and stuff like that. But because how many we've all seen The Exorcist, and I don't mean the exact film The Exorcist. We've all seen that exact story told 5,000 times in bad direct-to-DVD movies. So
or even just in folklore and anything. It's one of those stories that's been as old as, like Perry was saying, as old as campfire stories. Like it's that whole thing. So,
and the aspect of how we have relationship, not only with death, but even with each other. Yeah, I mean, something that and I was talking about this on another for the good friends of Jaxus and Elias horror podcast. I've just been walking through while my cousin was watching the remake of The Wolfman, and I happened to walk through in the moment where the girlfriend is talking to the gypsies, begging for whoever the guy's life is, and it struck me is that in gypsy culture, which is much more collective, why would a curse like this even exist? And then that made me realize, oh, this curse isn't really about the individual who did the harm. The curse is actually to the entire community for failing to keep this individual under control.
And another thing that kind of just hits me as I'm thinking is women have, always, you go back to, the early days of horror, women have been the subject of the menace, whether they were, passing out and being carried off by a monster, or whether they were the final girl having to face off against Jason. Now it seems like there's a much more psychological focus, but you still have women as the primary victim stars of the films. I personally kind of think maybe this is because you're having more women introduced into horror and watching horror. Obviously it's always been a thing, but when you have in the 80s when it was,
dude, women started horror. Mary Shelley
sure. But I'm talking about like there was a time there was a time when it was clearly made for the dudes who wanted to see naked breasts.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Whereas
Porky's
now,
generation.
whereas now, you have psychological studies of a mother grieving and that sort of thing. It kind of it reminds me of what you were saying about seeing something that hurts women, and and maybe we're getting beyond the things like I spit on your grave and stuff like that. But it reminded me of that. Of there is something very like hitting our core when it comes to the women we love being hurt. So
Well, there's the Middle Eastern film A Girl Walks Alone,
a,
which is a
girl
vampire
walks
story.
home alone at night, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's basically she's a vampire, and
Yeah,
she's
great
preying on
film.
those. Yeah, she's preying on all of those who would come after her, and especially in a culture which has its again cultural relationships around women and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Great scene of her riding down the street on a skateboard, and the way that her hijab is like flowing in the wind is very reminiscent of a vampire cape, and just a beautiful film. So yeah.
So
But that
I
also again gets into the social commentary around women.
Yep.
Well, okay. I have two more questions that I would like to ask, and I think we're gonna have to cut it off, you guys, because it's almost been 2 hours, and I'm like, oh no, we do need to do like a second part of
Let's
this
go.
because I'm like, there's so much stuff I still don't haven't asked about, and I'm sure you guys can inform me on that. But okay, just to make it a little bit lighter towards the end for my own inner peace,
Sanity.
so I can sleep at night tonight. What is your favorite horror movie cliche?
Ooh.
Favorite horror movie cliche.
I'm like trying to like
Or
run them
trope.
back because of that scene in Scream.
I just feel like the movies like Scream and others that have sent up the genre have just dismantled them so
Yeah.
badly that it's just like at this point you're like, man, I'm not even sure I can have any respect for a lot of just because they just owned them. That's a really tough
I'm
question.
gonna go. It's not a movie, but I'm gonna go Scooby-Doo. I love the trope that it's never actually a monster. It's just some old white dude who wants money.
That's
Um,
actually true though. That
That
actually
I
is the
know,
threat.
and it's the trope, and and that's why I love it because it's never an actual monster. And like the couple Scooby-Doo movies where it was a monster, the monsters were actually ended up being like the good guys. So, um, so yeah, I love the trope that it's always an old white man trying to kill people. Love it.
I will probably go anytime like the core cast of characters like splits up.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I love that from Scream, as I mentioned, to Scary Movie and Behind the Mask, and there's just it allows for that the goofiness level to be there, but also just to create some like really great gags and like great moments for the killer.
I can't say right now that I've got a particular favorite one, just because I've also begun exploring writing scenarios for RPG games. So I have to look at what trope is being used here, and how is it obvious that I'm using it, or is it my red herring?
Right.
But I would say the biggest one that is always is that someone just picks up a book and they already automatically open the page to the
the right
information they
page.
need.
Yes.
Yeah.
Evil,
I think
Evil Dead.
that is both
Or like
amazing,
if
but
they're
also
looking
annoying.
or they're like looking for a trap door and it's like a blank wall and they happen to pick the right minuscule spot in the wall.
They just step on it or something. All right. So, do you want to say something, Josh?
No,
Add
I was trying to feel out the wall for the
Oh, yeah.
Trap door.
trapdoor. Yeah.
In reality, you're just spending like 20 minutes just rubbing the wall.
Somewhere in my house there's a secret.
So we didn't get to do this because I totally ignored a hope. But what are your top 3 movies So this, I have another question that's gonna be a follow up. But these movies are for other horror fans, not necessarily like for me specifically, that I'm just a baby in this genre. Like, but for other people that like are really interested. Like, what would be your like, top 3 favorite movies you would recommend to anybody?
Good like gateway films or
No,
like
no, no.
all right, so
You're already in the fandom.
okay, all right, cool. That'll change the answers. All right.
All right, I'll start off.
Okay.
So my I guess my favorite slash comfort slash go tos. So my old school one would have to be the original Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm a Freddy girl, love him. And then for horror comedy, Tucker and Dale versus Evil. It is my comfort. I go to it. I love it. I've cosplayed it. He just hooked himself into a wood chipper. And then a third one I would have to say would be gosh, there's so many. I well, I mean, if there, I have so many because I also love like the Terrifier movies, but I'm not the biggest gore person. But then I also love things like I also love a really, really good psychological horror too. Like I just watched one recently, Stop Motion. That was really
I just
good.
bought that. I haven't watched it yet.
So good. So like I just love so many, but like my go-tos, my comforts, I should say, would have to be Tucker and Dale versus Evil and Nightmare on Elm Street. But there's a billion of them that I could also recommend that I love as well. So
a quick question before somebody else jumps into this. David and Josh, are you guys looking at your collection of movies?
I am, yes.
No, I'm looking around my room at different things I have, and I'm like, what's a good movie? Because most of my favorite movies are movies that I would not really recommend to someone that, isn't like me. But, we'll see. I'll come up with something.
I mean, I could also just go on my Letterboxd and look up all the horror films I've ever seen and like just list them.
I just thought it was so funny because then I I made fun of Hope once because she was saying something about having a collection of like movies, and I was like, "Ooh, you're old."
Because I have a DVD binder case, so apparently I'm old.
Oh, I've got VHS. So I also am looking right now at my Showgirls Laserdisc. So I don't know what that says about me. I will go.
Why did you get Laserdisc?
I love that movie. I own it on Laserdisc, VHS, and Blu-ray. So I will go classic because I think that every horror nerd should understand the foundation of where they came from. And I will say Frankenstein. A little bit of different to kind of steal some thunder from Perry of cosmic horror that I feel like everybody should check out is Possession. And it's kind of weird, but it's a great movie if you can stick with it. And then I will say like just dumb fun, Willy's Wonderland.
Okay.
Also, you just sparked something in me. I love House, the Japanese horror movie House.
Nice.
It's a really good one.
This is all like, I'm hoping this is helpful for people because I'm like, I have no idea what any of these movies are. So yes. David Perry.
Hit him, Perry.
Oh, well,
I have no idea.
I'm not actually going to go towards movies. I will say one of the movies that has stayed with me, even I've only watched it once, but I will never watch it again, is a 70s movie called Squirm. That just utterly stays with my mind, that I've never watched that movie again. But otherwise, if I'm looking for other things, so I'm going to actually go to a podcast done by Rodney Barnes called Run Fool. That's one of the ones I would listen to. Anything, obviously, from Symphony Entertainment, which is I'm on there. So shout out to them. There's also Ain't Slayed Nobody. They get a little into the comedy. Then there's also the Old Ways podcast. They do a variety of horror ones. And there was another series that I was following called Tanis. Nice. So they got a variety of offshoots there. So I've been, and reading old folklore. Those are the things I go to.
Books are so scary.
Oh my
but
gosh,
also
if we're
very
talking
interesting.
about folklore, the Wicker Man, the original Wicker Man.
Yeah. Go in as blind as possible, and it will delight you and hit you in the weirdest, worst, best possible way.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wait, quick question, Perry. You mentioned a couple of podcasts. Are they sort
Mhm.
of like reviewing these movies, or are they doing
No.
sort of like a role play, or
No.
what is?
So some of them are role plays, playing horror stories.
Mhm.
Another one is and Rodney Barnes. One is talking about various collected stories that are centered around horror. So,
Okay.
and again, they dance on that aspect of our folklore, from stories of, and with full respect to the Native Americans, the Wendigo, for example, or
Yeah.
dealing with zombies. Just listening to one that was talking about the classic story of the hit and run victim and what happens when they come back. So it's my focus is much more of those than, say, Hollywood and films and so forth.
Yeah, I think because I do have this one podcast that I listen to, and it I love the way they do it, because it is a true crime sort of thing, but they have things from like all the way back in the day and to like more recent things, but they always start with like that person's childhood and how anything could have affected them, and it's sort of like this person reacting to the script for the first time, and so it makes it a lot less scary for me. So I think one of those, like
So,
because I'm like, oh, it's just a myth, it's fine, it's not real. I think that would be a good gateway for me.
right. But I would actually say something to this before we go any further is you actually do have an interest in horror. You just haven't codified it in the memes the way everyone else has.
Yeah.
What is it?
You just told us about it. This podcast that you've been listening to.
Oh, but it doesn't, it's like not
You're
the
right
same.
now, you're classifying it as suspense as opposed to horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the other thing too that I was thinking about, because Hope brought it up, was Scooby-Doo, and I'm like, yeah, I grew up with like I love Scooby-Doo, and then
Perfect
I'm like,
gateway.
yeah, then I was like, okay, so then I got to thinking, and I was like, well, listen, what would you recommend for like a child? How would you introduce a child to the horror genre? And I think I would be okay with those. Go.
Like Scooby-Doo, Nightmare Before Christmas, Over the Garden Wall, Frankenweenie, Corpse Bride, Edward Scissorhands, Gremlins. There is a lot of like, even you could even technically probably say Goonies.
Yeah, you could make that
Um,
argument.
There's a
But-
lot of like children horror gateway, and we're not
Yeah,
even
like
going to
you
get
mentioned,
into anime.
Goosebumps and
Oh yeah,
Are You Afraid of the
Are You
Goosebumps.
Dark?
Afraid of the Dark?
I read all of Goosebumps when I was
Yeah,
a
and
kid.
that is when a kid is first getting that stuff, and you kind of know who's going to end up being the horror freaks because they read that and it strikes them in a way of, wow, I want more of that. Then obviously, they can get into your Gremlins, Ghostbusters, stuff that's not horrifying, stuff that's not scary, but can introduce you to that world.
Yeah, I think it too, like you guys already sort of like said this, and I'm just gonna repeat what you said. Like, it really depends on the things that you're afraid of, or like the things that you have struggled with in the past. Because I just thinking about what's the movie? Jumanji, and I'm like, okay, in my head, because I watched it as a kid, in my head that was the scariest thing, and then I watched it again, and I was like, why is it scary? But as soon as the drums start playing, and I'm like, I'm scared, and that's scary, but it's just
because
the
it
drums.
triggers memory. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. But also that audio effect, because
Mhm.
again, that's coming back to our nervous system.
Mhm.
Right? Humans, as a large lot, we do a lot of things through visual, but we have the other senses as well that also are key to being able to make something frightening.
Yeah. I mean,
And that is our inherent nervous system, because fundamentally we are still all animals on this planet.
Yeah.
From the marmoset to us, we all
Mhm.
still have a nervous system that's picking up all of those various senses, and it's being keyed on.
If I could quickly answer the question, just so the three films, obviously The Exorcist. If you're into horror and you haven't seen it, what's going on?
What are you doing here?
Yeah, there's another one that is, man, people who've seen this movie are going to go, this guy's out of his mind. There's a film called with Michael Cera and Juno Temple and some others called Magic, and it did not get good reviews. But when I watched that movie, when it was over, I was like, you know what I bet led this character into this? And you know what I bet led this character? And I found that I could go through the entire group of characters. One of them is clearly dealing with some mental issues, but all of the characters, I could imagine what led them into that situation and why they then reacted the way they did. And I think that film is, I mean, almost a masterclass in how to build a group of characters that is realistic in a horror situation. Not just here's the stoner and here's the slutty blonde and here's this, but you could take these characters and really, really kind of understand what their lives were about. Either that or I'm just out of my mind and the movie's terrible. But for me, that's how it hit me. And the third is a movie that occupies way too much of my thought process. It's called Chillerama, and it is a series of shorts. One is The Diary of Anne Frankenstein. One is Wadzilla, about a sperm that grows to the size of a giant monster and attacks the city. That Wadzilla, Diary of Anne Frankenstein, where everyone in that short is speaking German except for Hitler, who is speaking gibberish. And then there's a really short thing at the end called Deathication, which is about pooping to death. The Chillerama is absolute insanity. If you haven't seen it, it's good for a few laughs. Yeah.
I'm loving this.
So those would be three.
Yeah, I think there's so much to sort of like this genre in general that we don't like, like he was pointing out, like we either don't consider it to be part of horror or we just don't really think about it. And because I think we're always so focused on the movies because the movies give us like all of the senses, right? Or most of them. And then so for me, I'm a very visual person, so visuals are like play a very strong part. So that's why I sort of like avoid these movies. I did find a way around all of this to still hear sort of like, because I like the stories, right? Not so much the scary parts, but if I just like listen to someone like recap the story on like YouTube, I can still get it, and I don't have to watch the scary movie. And I won't be scared at night. I will still be able to sleep. So that's
Can I give you one?
Sure.
There's the meme that goes around of like still a better love story than Twilight.
Oh, yeah.
One thing that is a better love story than Twilight is a movie called Spring. It is a love story about a guy. He goes to Italy.
Yep.
I think goes to Italy, meets a beautiful woman, Nadia Hilker, I believe, and falls for her. And it turns out that she has a genetic throwback that is turning her into like a Lovecraftian monster.
Yeah.
And that is a movie made by Benson and Moorhead,
yeah.
who made the outstanding Resolution, which is one of my very favorite horror movies of the last however many years. It came out the same year as Avengers, and I think it's better than that. Spring is like if someone like watched Twilight and they were like, kind of, I like the horror thing, but man, I don't want to watch horror. Spring would be like the next one where I'd say, okay, here's Twilight, but good. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Okay. So that is a lot of recommendations. Thank you so much. And thank you for agreeing to come here on your free time and geek out with us and teach me about horror and give us all these recommendations. I'm not sure if like I'm 100% like in the fandom now, but I think I did realize that I would probably prefer to read these stories as opposed to watch them, because that's a lot scary.
And if
Mhm.
anything, I'll offer you this little challenge to consider. Consider doing character studies on short stories, writing for yourself,
Mm.
and exploring, if I made this a horror story or some sort of scare story, what would it be and how would these characters be? That could be a way for you to, again, enter into this for yourself at your own speed. How would I create the character or central character or tertiary character for this experience?
I like that.
What makes them afraid?
Yeah.
Pride
Yeah,
and
I really
Prejudice and
like that.
zombies.
Or Abraham Lincoln Vampire Killer.
Maybe not that one.
All right. Any last thoughts before we end for today?
I will turn
No?
you yet.
Okay. So, for anybody out there who might be interested in collaborating with you or reaching out to you about sort of either your businesses or nonprofits or whatever it is that you have projects going on, where can people find you? Are you open to collaborating with others? And what projects are you guys working on? We're gonna go with Perry because he's just on this side.
Okay, so
Let's say,
You
who's
go first.
going? Who's going?
yeah. Well, you can find me at my mental health practice, which is Untangle and Grow Counseling in San Francisco, Bay Area. Otherwise, you can also find me at my podcast, which is Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, which I know also sounds like it could be a horror title as well. You can also find me over at Symphony Entertainment there. And projects I'm working on is I'm trying to finish my first Call of Cthulhu scenario for publishing. And I do have a second one that I am already working on as well, which I'm hoping to playtest at some other gaming conventions soon.
Awesome. David?
Well, first of all, I'd like to give props to all of the others. Well, one, for doing such a great job here, but second, when she asked what we would recommend to newbies, none of you suggested a Serbian film. So props for that. I appreciate the fact that you actually took this seriously. So
I don't
second of
wanna
all,
scar
You
people
have
for
passed his
lying.
test. You're true horror fans.
no, it's for no one.
Oh.
No, so Geek Wellness Education is the name of the nonprofit. I mean, we're always doing something. Just for the past 2 weekends, we've been having some fun taking homeless kids to a local adventure park, and we had superheroes and princesses and SpongeBob and everything there for them. And we basically, we got their food and got, their drinks and all that kind of good stuff. That was the last couple of weekends we've been doing that. We did it yesterday. And there's a million other things that we have. Basically, anytime a movie comes out or a cool TV show, we try to figure out how do we take the public hype around this and turn it into a way that we can talk to people. When the last G.I. Joe movie came out, speaking of things that will horrify you, we had veterans out to, we got them tickets to the movie, unfortunately, and also provided free art and music therapy that is focused towards PTSD. We're always doing stuff like that. We are always looking to partner with people anywhere you happen to be in the country, because I'll travel anywhere. And you can reach us at GWE Contact on Facebook, on Instagram. GWEcontact.org is our website. And I mean, anything from Barbie and Power Rangers all the way up to, like I said, we did an entire thing around the country dealing with Child's Play and the loss of John LaFia. So anything like that, you can reach out to us, and we'll talk.
Awesome. Hope?
So you can see me on my YouTube channel, Mind Brain Movies, where I collab with Elizabeth and my other co-host Boone. I am more than happy, as I stated earlier, I'm going to poach these gentlemen here for future episodes. And then, if you also, I will.
She will do it. She's done it before.
I was
Also,
just looking for
because-
gentlemen, that's all.
But if you just want to talk to me personally, you can find my Instagram or TikTok, which is biohazard_Leia, like Princess Leia. But yeah, I love collabing. I'm also helping Elizabeth organize her nonprofit, Psychology for Geeks. Just doing a lot of work with that and growing my YouTube page. So
Yes, Josh.
I guess that leaves me. Yeah, so you guys can find me every Wednesday at 6 p.m. I am, like I said, one of 3 hosts on the Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we dive into the relationship between horror movies and mental health. The nonprofit's called Victims and Villains, and much like David's, we're kind of all over the place. So we've done cons the last couple of weeks. We just got off a short tour with a band from Florida. We did death metal band from New York last night. We're off the next couple of weeks to do some family stuff, but yeah, we're kind of everywhere. So you guys can find us everywhere. It's at Victims and Villains, or you guys can go to our website, victimsandvillains.net. I am more than willing to collaborate with anyone, but
And please hype your movie festival. Please do that. That's
yeah.
awesome.
One of the things that as Dave said before I get into that, if you go to victimsandvillains.net/hope, it is a collection of mental health resources.
about me?
And it's a long story. But yeah, that's it. It's everything from general resources to more specific ones like the LGBT QIA plus community, veterans, sexual assault, etc. But yeah, as David said, we also host every April in Winchester, Virginia. We do a horror film festival called Horrific Hope. You guys can go to filmfreeway.com/Horrific Hope Film Festival. Right now to submit, we're taking short films, feature films, and short scripts and feature film scripts until the end of the year. But yeah, basically it's the first festival to be horror centric and mental health focused.
Nice.
I approve. Not that you needed my approval, but thank you so much for doing this. Okay, so don't forget to subscribe to Psychology for Geeks so you can see a lot more of my collaborations with all these lovely people. And also in case we do a part 2 of this, because there is so much here that we didn't even get to touch. And I think once I start like reading some stuff or like, digging into maybe watching some of the things that I was recommended today, I will have a lot more questions. So hope you guys found this helpful and got tons of recommendations out of this panel. And I have no idea what's going to be happening next, but in the meantime, in the comments you can just sort of like write what is your recommendations for people, for kids, for newbies, or for people who have been sort of like in the fandom for a while. Everybody will benefit from having something new to watch. This exciting. And you can find us at Psych the number 4 and Geeks pretty much anywhere, all the social media except X. I just don't know how to work that one, so I just didn't bother with it. So anyway, but I am pretty much everywhere else. We do have a Patreon. If you have any questions for these lovely folk in terms of anything that they said or anything like that, or you have any suggestions as to what we can do in future panels, please let us know down in the comments, and I will have everybody's information in the description so you can see that down below. And thank you. This video is going to be super long, and I am so sorry for going over time.
And I'm totally gonna steal that Midsommar bear. Just saying.
And but once again, thank you everyone for agreeing to come. I've done a lot of panels, but when I sent the email for this particular panel, in like the same day, we were able to figure out when we could meet, and everything was like ready to go. That was great. And I had never
Except for
experienced
your
that before.
mistake, but
We don't talk about those. Okay. Why are you bringing them up? Like, I could have been the most professional person here,
it's
and
my
then you
job.
just kind of. Anyway, thank you again so much for joining us today, and don't forget to re-enchant your life, and we'll see you in the next whatever it is that I upload. Bye.
Bye.